Hope you feel this happy when it's over as well. As the saying goes, some people bring happiness wherever they go. Some others bring happiness whenever they go. I don't know what I'll be doing this morning. Thanks, Pastor Todd, for that kind word of introduction. I was reminded of this story as I was preparing for this talk. About a decade ago is when I first moved to the U.S. And I went to Biola University to pursue my master's in philosophy. And during my time at Biola, I was sharing a house with 3 other international students. One from Estonia, one from Canada, and the third one from Australia. So you have an Indian, Estonian, Canadian, and Australian, all lumped together in this international house. So the Estonian was an athlete. He was tall, strong guy, and he was training to be in the Olympics. So every morning he had his routine. He'd wake up in the morning, go for a run, and that would last for about an hour or so. He'd run about 5 miles, come back, have his breakfast, and then head for class. And he was very strict with his diet. He had a certain amount of carbs, a certain amount of protein. He had a high-protein diet. And he was into natural foods, right? So one day, we were both at a store in near our apartment. It's called, near our house, it's called Stater Brothers. I haven't seen any Stater Brothers around here. I don't think there is one here. So Stater Brothers in Los Angeles, and we are in this aisle, this juice aisle. And he says, how about we get some juice? 100% pure natural juice. I said, sure, that sounds like a good plan. Let's get some juice. And so as we're looking at this juice aisle, unfortunately on this particular day, the only juice that was available was prune juice. Little did we know what prune juice could do to us. So he asked me, what do you think? I said, let's get it. We both get it and take it home. We had our fill, and the rest is history. We were fighting for the restroom the rest of the night. Some pain is self-inflicted. And this morning, I hope I'm not inflicting any pain on you. And I hope you'd bear with me for the next couple hours or so. I won't be speaking for the next couple of hours, but, there's a break in between as well. So anyways, the topic that I've been given this morning is the problem of pain and the goodness of God. The problem of pain and the goodness of God. Suffering and pain resonate with all of us. We all have wrestled, encountered suffering and pain in our own lives. Some of us might very well be in the midst of pain. So this is a topic that hits close to home. In 2014, as Todd just mentioned, I was diagnosed with a very rare and aggressive form of cancer. It's called desmoplastic small round cell tumor. It's a kind of sarcoma, which is very rare, and my chance of survival was just 20%. So I'm in a hospital in New York City for about a year, undergoing 8 cycles of chemotherapy, 2 months of radiation, and 3 surgeries, not knowing or uncertain of what the outcome is going to be. Will I be among the few who survive, or will I be among the many who die. So there is a lot of uncertainty that I was facing at that point. And questions arise in moments of pain, right? We are inundated with questions. Why, God? Why do you allow so much pain in my life? Is it something that I've done that got me into this place? If you are so good and powerful, why do you allow this? So some people, when confronted with pain and suffering, they choose to walk away from the faith. Or they come to this conclusion that an all-powerful and perfectly good God does not exist. It was last year in Texas. A young man walked into a school and fatally shot 19 students. And I think it was 2 teachers as well, 2 adults who were also killed, and about 17 more were injured. A few months back, not too far from Charlottesville, in Nashville, Tennessee, a female student who was a former student walks into this Christian private school, killing 3 kids and 3 teachers. And when faced with such suffering, such evil, we begin to wonder, where is God in the midst of all of this? Is there a God out there who truly cares? Is there a God who truly loves? Is there a God who is powerful and good enough to stop this pain and this mess that we face in our world today? Human history is full of countless pain and suffering. As we look back into history, we see numerous catastrophic events that have taken so many lives. Earthquakes, tornadoes, the wildfires in the West Coast about 3 years ago that had engulfed nearly 5 million acres. And quite recently in Canada as well, I think there were reports of about 9 million acres of land that was engulfed by deadly flames. The spread of diseases like COVID that has taken a large number of people from among us, affected millions of lives. The world was shut down for a few years. And diseases like cancer that continue to wreak havoc, costing lives across the world. And then, as you look into history, you have the numerous wars and dictators like people like Mao Zedong, the communist Chinese leader, who took 45 million of his own people. Joseph Stalin, the Russian ruler, who took about 9 million. Hitler, who killed over 11 million, of which 6 million were Jews. So as you look back into history, you see countless suffering that have been inflicted by human beings, and then you read of natural disasters wreaking havoc as well. So when confronted with such evil, some people move from indifference toward God toward anger. And as Stendhal wrote, the only excuse for God is that he doesn't exist. So, the problem of evil is a very challenging problem. But the problem of evil is not just a problem for the theist who believes in God, it is also a problem for the atheist who does not believe in God. Why? Because on theism, we believe that human beings have intrinsic value and worth. Because human beings are created in the image, the imago Dei of God. So we believe in the sanctity of human life. Second, there is an objective standard of goodness, a moral law, on the basis of which we judge what is right and what is wrong, what is good and what is evil. In stark contrast, on atheism, we are molecular machines, a byproduct of time plus matter plus chance. There is no grounding for intrinsic value and worth. And two, there is no objective standard of goodness on the basis of which we judge something as evil or good. So it poses a problem for the atheist as well. But it rightly poses a problem for the theist. Why? Because the theist affirms the existence of an all-powerful God and a perfectly good God. So the argument from the atheist goes something along these lines. If God is all-powerful, then he would be, or he could prevent coronavirus. He could prevent cancer. He could prevent the wildfires and tornadoes and hurricanes. And if God is perfectly good, he would prevent evil. But evil exists, therefore God does not exist. Evil and God cannot both exist. This is what philosophers call the logical problem of evil. Listen to these words by the Greek philosopher Epicurus, who famously said, "Is God willing to prevent evil, but not able, then is he impotent. Is he able but not willing, then is he malevolent. Is he both able and willing, whence then is evil?" The presence of evil precludes or proves that God does not exist. Now, for this argument to work, we'd have to have a couple of assumptions, without which this argument won't work. The first assumption is that an all-powerful God can do anything. When we say God is omnipotent, when we say God is all-powerful, does that mean that God can do anything? No. There are certain things that an all-powerful being cannot do. An all-powerful being cannot create a square circle. An all-powerful being cannot create a married bachelor because it's a logical contradiction. To be married is not to be a bachelor. God cannot do the logically impossible. Number two, God cannot do or God cannot act contrary to his nature. God is eternal. God necessarily exists. Can he cease to exist? Can he stop existing one day? No. He always exists. He cannot cease to exist. Can God lie? No. Can God be tempted by evil? No. There are certain things an all-powerful being cannot do, a perfectly good God cannot do, which is to create states of affairs which are logically contradictory and to act against his very nature. Likewise, it is impossible for God to create a world in which there are free creatures and guarantee that these free creatures will always choose to do the right thing. But question, God is not just all-powerful and perfectly good, he is also all-knowing. If God is all-knowing, he knows that these free creatures that he creates will act in disobedience, will reject him, will rebel against him. The question then is, why did he create creatures with free will? For that, we have to look back into the first book in Scripture, Genesis chapter 1. In Genesis chapter 1, the writer begins with these words, Barashith bara Elohim. In the beginning, Elohim, God, created the heavens and the earth. God, who eternally existed in joyful community within the Trinity, chooses to create out of sheer goodness. And then we see the creation of humanity. And the purpose of creating humanity was that human beings could enter into a loving, meaningful relationship with God and enter into the divine life. That is the purpose of creation. We are made for him, and our hearts will find rest only when we find him and when we are in his presence. So, God creates out of the goodness of heart with the purpose that human beings can have a meaningful, loving relationship with him. But if that is the intent of creation, it is imperative that God gives human beings free will, because in the absence of free will, you cannot have a loving, meaningful relationship. It is essential for love to have free will, because there is no such thing as forced love. Now let's look at the second assumption. A perfectly good God would prevent evil. This is not true either. Even in our own human experience, there are times we allow certain amounts and kinds of evil to bring about a greater good. We have a little child, his name is Wesley. We take Wesley regularly to the doctor, and he has to go in for his vaccination. Every time he gets a jab, he cries, and he helplessly looks at us, wondering, what on earth are you guys doing? I thought you loved me, and now you bring me to the hospital and let the doctor jab me. At the end of it, you pay the doctor for jabbing me. It just can't make sense of this. No matter how much you explain or try to explain to the child the reasons why you allow this pain in the present, the child cannot grasp those reasons. But just because the child cannot grasp the reasons the parents have in allowing this pain in the child's life does not entail that the parents have no good reason. Just because we cannot think of any good reason why an all-powerful, perfectly good God would allow pain and suffering in the world does not entail that God has no good reasons. God may have, or God has very good reasons in allowing pain and suffering. Let me illustrate that for us this morning. Which is the most violent, evil act in all of human history? Murder is, murdering someone is a violent, evil act. But if you look at history, which is the worst evil ever perpetrated on the surface of planet Earth? It was the crucifixion of the innocent, spotless, righteous Lamb of God. Now, I want you to imagine with me for a moment. Think you were one of the 12 disciples who left everything to follow this man who claimed to be the Messiah. And you saw with your very eyes Jesus speak and calm the storm. You saw with your very eyes Jesus feed the 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fish. You saw with your very eyes Jesus standing right in front of Lazarus' tomb, and he says, "Lazarus, come forth." And Lazarus comes out of the tomb. And now before your very eyes, Jesus is taken, betrayed by one of your colleagues. And he's led away, tried, and condemned to die. The innocent one, the righteous one, the one you thought is the Messiah, the one who worked miracles, healed the leper, now hanging on a cross. Does it make any sense? Why would God, if there is a God out there, why would he allow the death of an innocent man, a good man? And you witness the most cruel death, the crucifixion of the Messiah. It made absolutely no sense to the disciples who witnessed the crucifixion before their very eyes why God would allow the death of Jesus of Nazareth. Maybe Jesus got it all wrong. Maybe he is not who he claimed to be. Even the religious leaders who were standing there, they said, if he is who he claimed to be, then he would come out of the cross. Let God vindicate him. God doesn't vindicate him. But it all begins to make sense. 3 days later, the tomb is open, the stone is rolled away, and Jesus appears to the disciples, and he says, "Fear not." In that moment of crucifixion, it made absolutely no sense why God would allow the death of an innocent man. But 3 days later, it all made sense. What seemed to be God's negligence was a master stroke, because behind the scenes, God was accomplishing a great good, the greatest good of our redemption. And that great good could not have been accomplished without allowing the great evil of the crucifixion. Today, as God's people, we stand together in worship, in adoration of the Son who was crucified in our stead. The Son who rose from the dead. It all makes sense in hindsight, but it never did in the present. We do not have the vantage point that God has to look into the future and see what good would come out of the evil he allows in the present. And just because we can't see what good God can accomplish through allowing the pain in the present, let us not be hasty in saying God has no good reasons in allowing the pain in the present. Now, what good could there be in God allowing natural disasters and evil in our world? We talked about free will, and that explains a lot of the evil in the world, moral evil, where human beings are using their free will to inflict pain and suffering on others. But what good could there be in natural disasters and God allowing natural disasters? Let me try to explain that a little bit. Now, pain is not something that we all desire, right? We all try to avoid pain to the extent possible. Anytime you have a headache, you take a medication and you're trying to deal with the pain. But pain is a protective mechanism. Pain is a symptom of a deeper underlying problem. So if you're just treating the symptom, then, well, you might be able to somehow subdue the symptom, but this is a persisting problem. You'd have to keep taking pain medications to deal with the pain, but unless you deal with the root of the problem, you could be in real danger. Pain is body's mechanism to protect itself from danger outside. Could it be that natural disasters are a warning sign, or more than just warning? Is it God screaming to us that something is deeply wrong with this world? It was C.S. Lewis in his book, The Problem of Pain, who said, God whispers to us in times of pleasure. He speaks to our conscience, but he screams to us in times of pain. Pain is God's megaphone to a deaf world. So when you see natural disasters, you know this is not how it ought to be. It is symptomatic of a deeper underlying problem. Imagine if everything, if the environment was perfect, if there was no evil or no pain or no suffering, it would be quite easy for us to live with a false sense of security and think that everything is okay. But because of the existence of pain, it is sort of like a megaphone screaming at us. Something is deeply wrong with our world, and that something is deeply wrong with us. It serves as a constant reminder of the fallenness of man and our alienation from God. It awakens us to the fact that this is not how the world ought to be, and that we are created for another world. It creates in us a longing for something more. Could it be that natural disasters is a way that God is getting to us and letting us know that something is deeply wrong? So I submit natural disasters is a mechanism that we see in the fallen world by which God is trying to get our attention and awaken us to the reality of another world. You know, Paul Brand, the missionary doctor to India, in his book, The Gift of Pain, he writes of his experiences with leprosy patients in India. He says, among these leprosy patients, one of the greatest problem is that they can't experience pain in their extremities. So a lot of these patients who have come to him, he has noticed that many of them, they have deformed fingers, deformed hands, and legs, feet, and so on, particularly the toes. And then he realized it's actually rats eating flesh in the night as they are sleeping. And since they can't experience pain, they're oblivious to what is happening. And they are so deformed. So Brand tried to fix the problem. What he did was he created pressure-sensitive gloves. And some mechanism, a battery pack that would light up or make a sound appear in the ear when rats nibble at them. But that didn't work. So Brand tried another solution by which there was an electric shock that was delivered to the elbow whenever a rat or a rodent would nibble at their fingers or on their toe. That worked because this area was sensitive to pain, and every time a rodent nibbled, it sent strong electric shock that woke them up, awakened them to the danger out there. So the argument is, or the thesis of the book is, pain is a gift that God has given human beings. It's a protective mechanism. In 2009, Discovery ran a show, for lack of a better word, titled The Boy That Never Felt Pain. It is a story of a young boy named Carson who suffers from a medical condition called CEPA, congenital insensitivity to pain and anhidrosis. For the little boy Carson, life was fun for quite a bit. You know, he was running around banging doors. He never felt any pain. He's oblivious to pain. It was bliss. But then, you know, parents see the tragedy that comes with it. The fingers are burned, scratches all over, broken bones. And you know the parents with kids who have CEPA, what their prayer is? In fact, one mother of a child in Atlanta, I think it was on CNN, who is suffering from CEPA, this is what she told the reporter. Every morning I bend my knee and ask God, please give her the ability to feel pain. In a perfect world, it is good to have no pain. But in a fallen world, pain is a blessing that we don't see often. We don't see the blessing that comes with pain. Time's gone, and I have to close. So, pain is God's mechanism to speak to a deaf world, awakening us of the need for, awakening us to the reality of another world. 2, I just want to close with this. The theistic God, the Christian God, is not one who stands away from our pain, watches us settle scores, and go through the mundane and lets us all suffer. But he is a God who steps into this fallen world and suffers with us in our stead. So as you look back into history, we see God in the person of Christ enduring suffering and pain for us. And then in our present day, as we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, he is a God who whispers his love, his peace, his comfort in our ears. I said in 2014, I was diagnosed with this rare form of cancer and uncertain of what the future holds. In moments of doubt and questions and confusion, I got on my knees and I said, God, why? At the time, I was reading through the book of Isaiah, and I got to Isaiah chapter 40. For those of you who have not read Isaiah chapter 40, I'd highly recommend that you take your Bibles tonight and read it. For those of you who have read it, please reread it. Because in Isaiah chapter 40, the prophet goes at great lengths to speak of the splendor, the majesty, the glory of God. He who spreads the heavens like a canopy. He who calls the stars into being. Eternal God, everlasting creator. And then in Isaiah chapter 40, verse 8, the prophet writes, He gathers the lambs in his arms and carries them close to his heart. This God, who is incomparable to any in his wisdom, in his power, in his majesty, in his glory, is incomparable to any in his love and tenderness for his sheep. So every night, as I cry, not every night, but many nights when I cry myself to sleep because of the intensity of pain. Some nights I had to be on 17 pain medications. I'm reminded of this verse in Isaiah chapter 40. I shared this with my aunt in New York, and she had this painting of Jesus holding a sheep, and they had written this verse underneath this painting. So in the night, I cry myself to sleep. In the morning, I wake up as the sunlight brightens up my room. I wake up to see Jesus holding the sheep. He gathers the lambs in his arms and carries them close to his heart. What a picture. Fanny Crosby, who was born blind, wrote many songs. One of them goes like this: safe in the arms of Jesus, safe on his gentle breast, there by his love overshadowed, sweetly my soul shall rest. Safe from the blight of tomorrow, safe from fear and all else, safe from the fear of tomorrow, safe in his gentle arms. This God is not a God who steps away, but is a God who steps in, and he suffers and suffered with us in history, in the cross, in the person of Jesus Christ. And this God is one who walks with us as we walk through the valley of the shadow of death. The Spirit ministers his peace, his love, his grace to us in our weakest moments as well. I close with this. E. Stanley Jones, the British missionary to India. He ministered in India for many years. In his book, Christ of the Indian Road, he talks about a Bengali poet who writes to another fellow missionary in India, C.F. Andrews. And I quote these words. This is the poem that he wrote. Great-souled Christ, on this the blessed day of your birth, we who are not Christians bow before you. We love and worship you, we non-Christians, for with Asia you are bound with the ties of blood. We, the puny great we, the puny people of a great country, are nailed to the cross of servitude. We look mutely up to you, hurt and wounded at every turn of our torture. The foreign ruler over us, the crown of thorns, our social caste system, the bed of spikes on which we lie. The world stands aghast at the earth hunger of Europe. Imperialism in the arms of Mammon dances with unholy glee. The three witches, war lust, power lust, profit lust, revel on the barren hearths of Europe, holding their orgies. There is no room for thee there in Europe. Come, Lord Christ, come away. Take your stand in Asia, the land of Buddha, Kabir, and Nanak. At the sight of you, our sorrow-laden hearts will be lightened, O teacher of love. Come down into our hearts and teach us to feel the suffering of others, to serve the leper and the pariah with an all-embracing love. I quoted this poem to tell you something. He was comparing the suffering of the Indian people who were fighting against their British rulers back in the day with the suffering of Jesus Christ. It's not one and the same. Jesus suffered in our stead. He was the innocent one. But what I wanted to show to you is, here is a people who is enduring pain and suffering, relating with the suffering of Christ. The suffering of Christ spoke volumes to them. And Jones goes on to say, if God in character is like Jesus, he is good and trustable. Men wonder if there can be a good God when they see earthquakes wipe out the innocent and the guilty alike, and innocent little children suffer from nameless diseases they did not bring on themselves. But the distracted and doubting mind turns toward Jesus with relief and says, if God is like that, he is all right. If God cares for the leper, the outcast and the blind, and if his heart is like that gentle heart that broke upon the cross, then he can have my heart without reservation and without question. Edward Shillito, the Church of England priest during World War I, wrote these words. If we have never sought, we seek thee now. Thine eyes burn through the dark, our only stars. We must have sight of thorn pricks on thy brow. We must have thee, O Jesus of the scars. The other gods were strong, but thou wast weak. They rode, but thou didst stumble to a throne. But to our wounds only God's wounds can speak, and only you, O Lord, have wounds capable to speak to our wounds. I know I've said a couple of times I'm closing, but I'm closing. In New York, when I was at the hospital, you see a lot of patients with all kinds of diseases. And as you walk from bed to bed, there is a blank look on their face. And each one's wondering, what on earth am I doing here? Why am I here? There is intense pain. But you take a few steps away from the general ward to the labor ward. There is intense pain there, but no mother is asking the question, what on earth am I doing here? Why? Because the pain is a precursor of the joy that awaits. The joy of holding that child that mother carried for 9 long months overshadows those moments of excruciating pain, infuses those moments of pain with meaning. There is hope. The Christian lives in the in-betweens of what God has done and what God is in store. We have a world that is coming in which there'd be no more pain, no more tears, no more sorrow. There is hope if you are a Christian. What a Christ, what a Savior, what a hope that Christ gives to each of us who trust and leans on him. And that to me answers this rather challenging and troubling problem of pain like no other worldview ever can. May God bless each of you. Thank you.